How are you doing, Colleen? It's great to actually finally speak to you voice to voice.
Yeah, I've heard your voice on some of your xenophobia, whatever they're called. Yeah. I've heard your voice before. So
that's a polite way of calling it. Your whatever they're called. Thank you for being restrained in your praise.
Yeah, we've been friends for a while on Facebook, and we've lamented all of the ups and downs in the past, 3 or 4 years, and it's been quite a journey, and it's not over yet, obviously. So
yeah, it's just one unending mass psychosis campaign after the next.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I spoke to a pretty large group way back in 2008, I believe. We had this, they called it Peace Island Conference and Peace Island Picnic when the Republican National Convention was held in St. Paul, Minnesota in 2008. And I was one of the speakers at this conference. And back then, I basically had already deduced that so much of this is manipulation. And I remember looking out at the audience to a bunch of puzzled faces. It was supposed to be an anti-war conference, but I was talking about how you get yourself manipulated by pressing the fear, hate, greed, false pride, and blind loyalty buttons. And a lot of them were just, basically it was a liberal Democratic audience at the time because it was opposing the Republican National Convention. But I basically have known this now for a long, long time, that it's so easy to manipulate people through their emotional vulnerabilities. And I think that accounts for this strange journey we're on where people can understand a particular issue, and yet the next day they're completely off in la la land. And I've seen this happen now with the wars. We had people that were really good opposing Bush's wars. So back in 2008, that would have been most of the audience because they really were against the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. But then you fast forward to immediately after Obama's election, and that group, again, due to the blind loyalty and the false pride of their identity that's in their heart and not in their head, and they're off, now promoting the war, the U.S. war in Ukraine, even Israel's war on Gaza. It's, of course, I just misnamed it. It's not a war, it's a genocide. So it's amazing how these things, and most, of course, of the people who more or less understood, or at least I thought they understood, that the military-industrial complex was really, really the source of this corruption for war profiteering. And again, I thought most people really had that firmly a grasp of. But then you go to, beginning of 2020, and most of these people couldn't understand that Fauci and the rest of these virus bioengineers, bioweapon engineers, they couldn't understand that this was related. It's just amazing. And to this day, they still are wearing masks, and they don't even understand the truth of the whole thing, even after all the facts have come out. I was at the conference at the it's called UNAC, and it's it's actually one of the better, if not the best, anti-war groups in the United States. UNAC. It's kind of a far left, national liberation oriented group, and not half, but a solid 1/3 of the audience had masks on this last weekend. So and even two of the best speakers. Honestly, they were the smartest people in the room when it came to debunking the propaganda leading to war on China. They were actually the best, and I saw them both with masks on. And it's
a phenomenal. It's a phenomenal thing. I went to. I was just randomly bumped into a Palestine protest, a pro-Palestine protest, and there was a fellow there giving out masks to the protesters. And it's another example of how these issues have become so partisan skewed. What you're talking about, like your eyes opening up to this reality after Bush left and then Obama came in, you started to see this like partisan shifting. It's nothing new. Like, in retrospect, we may have sort of become more sensitive to it at that moment because it was such an extreme shift, especially when Trump came in and we saw some other usually reliable participants like Democracy Now! All of a sudden celebrating the CIA. This partisan derangement is nothing new. You know, like I grew up in the 70s and was massively influenced by like the British punk rock musicians who were speaking truth to power and kind of carried on this rebellious attitude. But in retrospect, and seeing how all of them fell for the corona panic, all of them were pro-Biden in 2020, seeing them just shift gears like this, I realized like I didn't understand it when I was a kid, but it was just partisan derangement. They can criticize the government and criticize participants in the government if they're on the wrong side of the ideological tribal chasm. But once it shifts back to their camp, then everything is fine again and everybody gets a free pass. And it speaks to this phenomenon of having a tribe that you can align with and identify with. And once you let go of that, once you're willing to let go of that, it's very frightening for a lot of people to do that because it requires letting go of a lot of narrative assumptions. But there's a great freedom in doing that because now you can see reality more objectively without coloring it with your partisan derangement. And plus, you don't have to wear a mask and look like an absolute twat in the process.
You know, it's what the old adage was, never argue with someone about religion. And it's the same basic phenomenon. It's because when people take on an identity with an affinity group, and usually, you know, obviously this can be race-based, it can be gender, it can be even now sexual orientation-based, it can be national-based, which we used to call patriotism. It can be based on any affinity group whatsoever. But when you take that on as your most important thing that defines you, it is emotionally based. It's not factually based. It's emotionally based. And you can't then, typically, of course, like with a political party, you are going to avoid or omit the facts that don't align with your dogma or your political party, what do they call it? Your, not dogma, but your basically what they're telling everybody they have to believe in that party.
Yeah, the tenets of the tribe.
Yeah, exactly. The tenets of the tribe. And again, it's a lot more. I know people always talk about racism. You even see this now with the Palestinian issue where they're lamenting that it took 7 international workers to be killed before Americans kind of said, oh, this is bad. And as long as the Palestinians were being killed, it was like shrug, shrug.
Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. There's been international condemnation after the death of 7 aid workers in Gaza. The charity World Central Kitchen says their convoy was bombed in an Israeli airstrike just after they'd unloaded food from a warehouse. They are now suspending their operations in Gaza.
And then the people I've heard as commentators were attributing this to racism. Well, racism is one tribal identity. It's one. Yes, in the past it's loomed very large, but it's just one small segment of all the bigotries that come along with joining any group. And of course, the problem, when you join a group, it's right off the bat going to have some inherent bigotry. And I will say the biggest bigotry is that this group, the reason you join it is because you believe yourself. This is where the pride comes in. And pride is such a manipulating thing. then you immediately think, well, this is the better group. Yeah, otherwise I wouldn't have joined it. I would have joined the other groups. So immediately that pride just blinds you to the imperfections and the flaws in your group. And you get to see the flaws in the outer groups very easily. There's nothing new under the world. And this is the problem right now with the whole worldwide situation. You kind of said this, you came close to saying this, because if we are allowed not to be told what to think and believe, and yet can use our best minds. Of course, we all have differing abilities in our minds, but if we are allowed to use our own thinking skills and based on facts and logic, etc., to come up with, what's the best truth of this and what is the best conclusion that we can do, I think what we find in the whole wide world, no matter what religion, no matter what nationality, what race, what sexual orientation, etc., I think we all kind of have a large amount of agreement if we are allowed to discuss and really ferret out where we come down on things, and if we're allowed to see the facts. But our manipulators, I hate to call them leaders, are leaders who are psychopathically inclined, and they're really good at pressing emotional buttons, because that's how it's not genetically, but some of it is actually genetic and some of it's environmentally learned. But psychopathically endowed people are really good at manipulating their followers. And what they have wanted to do is always divide and conquer. That's always been a constant. And so you see so many of these false issues, these false dividing things amongst populations. And this is where war and violence and conflict comes from. Because if you actually were allowed to think for yourself, you would find, maybe there would still at the end of the day, we've talked about this. Sometimes you just have to agree to disagree on some things for the betterment of your emotional attachment. If it's a friend or family member or something, the better course is not to keep arguing and just say, well, okay, we're going to agree to disagree on that. But, we agree on this, and this, that type of thing. So, but what you would find is you wouldn't find people going to war and actually killing children over their beliefs. But right now, between all of these psychologically inherent, it's in the human race, it's from the animal kingdom, we find ourselves on the precipice of probably the worst divide and conquer. I think definitely the worst since World War I in the world. In terms of polarization, we've got two teams out there, the two superpower teams, and we are really looking at some dangerous, I think far dangerous even than the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the things that they're using are Israel's genocide on Palestine, the proxy war in Ukraine, the attempt to incite Taiwanese, as well as a whole bunch of other places all over the world. And this is just coming to a head. It's like a perfect storm. So it's why I volunteered to go on quite a dangerous mission to try to sail into Gaza with humanitarian food and medicine. And it's hard to explain to people because we are such creatures of our mass media brainwashing. And I think very few people understand. I think if people did understand what a dangerous course we are on right now, and didn't just think, oh, well, it's just those Palestinians who are far away. And yeah, I guess like Madeleine Albright, they have to kill a few hundreds, thousands of children because it's worth it. I think most people that I know, at least in the United States, shrug it off that way.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it. It is a moral question, but the moral question is even a larger one. Don't we owe to the American people and to the American military and to the other countries in the region that this man not be a threat?
It's far off, and it's the same way they shrugged off Iraq war and Libya bombing and Syria and all of the other ones that have happened, all of the regime change coups. And most people in the United States are very oblivious and basically sleepwalking right now. And they are manipulated and brainwashed by their various divisive identity groups. And I think that's the problem. It's gone on way too far, too long.
This is Winston the Homicidal Computer. And you've been listening to an excerpt from Cinephobia Radio. For the complete episode, visit the website at www.cinephobia-radio.com. So until next time, vidi well my little droogies. Vidi well.